everyone, to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past broadcasts are available in podcast form. Pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Hit us up at DJ@ArtistFirst.com. And now here they are, your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. It feels like Groundhog Day. I'm not sure why. But I've got this weird sense of deja vu. But that happens to me a lot because I'm kind of like a moron. Anyway, hi. I'm Michael Lyons.
You are not a moron. And I'm Margaret.
She's Margaret, and she loves me. That's why she thinks I'm not a moron, but I am. And but tonight, we will have a non-moronic topic to talk about.
All right.
Actually, we're going to talk about a maybe this is something that I just neglected, but I didn't realize that Lucius Antonius Seneca, also known as just Seneca, the guy behind the apple juice, has an amazing amount of quotes out there, and we ran into them, and we were looking through some of them, and one of them struck us, so we're going to talk about that tonight. But I think we might be talking a lot more about the apple juice guy.
Okay.
Okay. And he really wasn't famous for his apple juice, but he is an interesting figure, and he was one of, I'll just say it, the classical Stoics, and we may talk about that in some future time as well. It's not what you think. It's not somebody who's unemotional and like Arnold Schwarzenegger, unable to act. But anyway, we're getting far off the field. So tonight's topic on the Soul of the Everyman is, to sum it up, it's really weakness, and maybe it would be a good idea to kind of trying to define the term, because I think a lot of people think of weakness as just being, let's say, unable to, the 98-pound weakling, having somebody kick sand in your face. But in this case, what we're really talking about is sort of I'll say it in this is a word that people get kind of tripped up on too. It's sort of a degeneracy of the spirit. The weakness that we're talking about here is a person's core has at its core has some sort of a flaw. It has some sort of a lack. Truly, a weakness in this case is like a crack in a steel beam, or in a foundation of a house. And like anything, if you're weak at your core, whatever you build on top of it will be shaky. So this is the kind of weakness we're talking about. But maybe you have a better, more pithy
definition.
Yes.
Well, the tendency, whenever there is any kind of conflict or argument, is that the one that gives in is considered weak. And that's not true. Weakness is not letting someone win an argument. Weakness has to do with the ability within yourself to, maybe the best way to describe weakness that we all understand is whenever there is that argument between two. We've all been trained, if you would, mentally focused into winning the argument, being the stronger. I think we've all been exposed to the idea that only the strong survive, that Darwinist way of looking at things. But that doesn't only describes a physical strength, an ability to dominate, if you would. And if you can't dominate, then you were classified as the weak one. And that is not really the definition. When it comes to oneself, weakness is, how do I even?
I think it's a lack. It's really a lack. It's a lack of I would define this type of weakness that we're talking about as more of a weakness of moral fiber. It's more of a weakness of spirit.
The one that we are focusing on
right
now as our subject has to do with that internal weakness. And it stems very much from not knowing who you are.
Yeah.
Because you feel vulnerable. Like you can get hit from a point or a perspective that you cannot see.
Well, and I think perhaps the defining thing about this particular type of weakness is that a great deal of energy is spent in concealing it. In other words, to the person who feels that they are weak, they feel vulnerable and they feel threatened all the time, regardless of their actual perhaps external power. They may look very powerful. They may have a very powerful position. They may have a very powerful, the ability to dominate may be something that they have, but at their core, they feel vulnerable, weak, and they feel victimized. And really, that's the definition. But what we're really going to explore is one aspect of that, which is, again, back to our apple juice guy, Seneca. He made a very pithy observation. He said, all cruelty springs from weakness, from this type of weakness. And what we'll talk about tonight, what we're talking about here, is that really not just cruelty, but the partners of cruelty, the injustice, needless aggression, it all comes from weakness. If you see somebody who's got a very short fuse, who flies off the handle at the slightest offense, who can't take any criticism, and you say, "Oh, that guy is like a powder keg," or that lady, let me say the tiniest thing to her, and she basically loses it. These people internally are weak. The show of aggression, the show of dominance sometimes, and cruelty. I would digress and even say that the tendency towards sadomasochism, or even towards serial killers, oftentimes these are extremely weak people, extremely vulnerable people who act out these dominance or cruelty fantasies in order to kind of defend themselves against this internal weakness. And so this type of weakness provides a vent for great injustice. You see when people lash out, when people have no other response than anger, and usually unjustified or asymmetrical anger. From the tiniest provocation, they come out with these roaring, explosive events. It's because at their heart, at their core, they perceive themselves as being endlessly vulnerable, as being the victim. Everyone's against me, and I have to always strike out. It's because you have that at your core, this weakness. And Seneca made this observation, and you see it played out both small and large. I think social media is a microcosm of this. I would say, again, there's a term called asymmetric warfare, and sometimes it means sort of a guerrilla warfare, where the weaker force attacks the stronger force, and in doing so inflicts damage, and then the idea is to hit and run away, hit and run away. You see this in social media. The idea of this sort of the idea of this. People call them trolls. They're literally looking for a fight. They're saying things which are outrageous and provocative to engage people in a sort of a pointless argument, merely for the cruelty of it, for the venting of aggression of it. It is one of the characteristics of a weak person is they want to hit and run away and be safe. They themselves never want to risk anything. They want to they pick on the weak or on the people who can be easily defeated. In other words,
or they think they can be easily defeated.
Exactly.
They perceive them as the weaker and the vulnerable. Therefore, if I engage them, I'm going to win.
Right.
And I'm not going to get the short end of the deal. I'm going to get what I want.
And we should define our terms, because the weak thing here is that this person will not attack back, or this person will be too nice. And so you will see this when a tiny offense is given to one of these internally weak actors. The response is asymmetric. It's far beyond what would be justified by the offense. And they'll usually either direct it at a person who can't fight back or won't fight back. It's a classic sort of bullying scenario. Bullies, again, we all know this from every Hallmark movie. Bullies are weak at their heart. If you stand up, if you stand up to a bully, you will defeat them. But they put on this hyper-aggressive face to hide the weakness, and use that weakness as a vent for cruelty, for injustice, for ganging up and making sure that they're always in a position where they look invulnerable, and they are dominant to a fault. They don't just want to tell somebody what to do or correct them. They want to destroy them and denigrate them. This is an evidence of weakness.
I think the overriding source of this weakness is fear.
Yes.
Because it's the fear that is being revisited. Maybe that's the best word. When a person is afraid that they're going to be found out as less than in some way, shape, or form, they want to compensate or overcompensate. And it usually stems from some past experience. That past experience hasn't been processed. There's a lot of emotion that had risen from that experience, and it was not let go. So they took that frustration, they took that anger, and they shoved it inside of themselves. And at that point, they always have that voice speaking to them about how they're less than. You're never enough. And every time they come into some kind of interchange, that voice is looking for a way to be triggered again and whisper in that person's ear to feel again that moment when they lost, or they were less than, or felt awful, or were dominated, or disrespected, or it's this hole that you feel when you go through it. So you don't want that experience again. And it's that fight or flight thing. But the problem is what you're actually fighting, what you think is going to trigger you, is not the source of it. Fear is the source of it.
Mm.
And it is the fear that needs to be fought, not the other person that you believe is triggering it. Because once that trigger hits, you can't distinguish between what it is you're reacting to and who said it. And that's a split second right there.
Mm.
Because internally you want to believe that whoever said it is what you're reacting to, what has triggered you. And it's not the person, it's the event. And it takes an internal grounded state to be able to see that. Like, oh, this reminds me of what happened to me before. But no, I'm not doing that. And that no, instead of taking the energy that's rising up in you because it doesn't want to experience it again, instead of taking it and directing it at the fear that, oh no, it's going to happen again, they direct it at who they think is making it happen.
Yeah, that's the mechanism for sure. And you see it played out, though. I think any one of us can think of an example of this type of person. And you can also look internally. You can say there are times when you become this type of person if you have a unresolved issue. And I think you did a very good justice of showing the timeline. And before we go directly to that, there's a similarity between that and these emotional triggers. In fact, a great deal of research has been done to show that these experiential traumas really get tied to these let's call them these sort of archetypical triggers. Okay. Before we go too far, the archetypical triggers are the things that we are born with. Human beings are born with an innate fear of certain things. You can show these things to a newborn child and you will get a fear response. A snake, a spider, etc. Loud noises and so on. There are a few things that a suite of them that trigger certain basic fight or flight survival emotions: anger, fear. These things are important. They're important for our survival. They're important for the survival of all species on the planet. They come as part of our basic programming, as a part of the incarnation. These other experiential traumas gain their power by linking themselves within your mind, within your psyche, to these archetypical triggers: fight or flight, fear, anger. So when you have an experiential event which you don't process, which you tuck away into your psyche, it links itself to these archetypical triggers like fear, like anger, like fight or flight, and draws power from them. So then human beings, all of us, have this constant background scan of looking for threats. This is part of survival mechanisms. This has also been shown that we don't need to you don't need to understand what you see before you start to react to what you see. If a thing pops up in a horror, in a haunted house type of situation that triggers fear, you will show fear before you even realize what it is, because that's so. This mechanism is the one that does what you just said. It triggers through this archetypical fear, fight or flight or anger, and strikes into these experiential, it can be one or more, experiential events which have also linked themselves to these triggers. And then this wonderful passion play sets itself up in this person's psyche. You plug in the current person or thing which has started this event into the experience you had in the past and play the thing out. And as you said, if you don't take the moment to say, this is bringing up a memory of something in the past in a grounded way, you go right past it, you blow and relive the point in the past.
You relive.
And the weakness is that you don't stop, that you haven't processed that and understand it, and therefore understand that you might be being triggered. Rather than do that, you go right into it. And then you get this asymmetric response. You become the thing that frightened you.
Yeah.
Or you become the thing that angered you.
Right.
And you bring back at full roaring force this emotional response, because as human beings in a survival situation, you don't take time to say, well, maybe I shouldn't hit, maybe I shouldn't run, maybe this could be good. No, you go boom, hit, run, go. So you go right into attempting to either destroy that thing or run away from that thing or become everything about what frightened you towards that thing. And you get this asymmetric response. Cruelty is something which people associate with sort of a, let's say, a long-term sort of nefarious plot. I'm going to do something, it's going to be this and that. But the triggers for that cruelty are these things which put you into the state where the object that you're being cruel to no longer has a human face. It no longer has the right to be treated as you would treat any other or treat yourself. It has become less than, and therefore an object which you can torture or become emotionally cruel to, emotionally distant, emotionally denigrating, and
yes, because you haven't processed the emotion.
Yeah.
And you turn into the thing that has hurt you. You have become your own worst enemy.
Mm.
And that is something that, when you think about it and you go through it again, you're like, how did I do that again? How did I give that same response again?
Mm.
And I'm saying the things that I never meant to say. The things that had hurt me, I said again to somebody else. And that is at the base of that, the awareness of, I haven't processed this.
Mm. It's interesting you bring that up, because I think that there's a self-awareness that can come later. It doesn't come in the moment if you haven't processed it. In the moment, you leap past all that. But I think that it's interesting that in a subsequent moment, far away from the actual event, there are potentially regrets, or at least a like, why, a questioning. Why did I? But I think then there's a resistance to. If we go back a little bit, these events which you've pushed into your psyche and have not processed grow sort of a calcification, a shell. There's a resistance to going into them to process them, which grows over time. That's not to say that you don't instantly get put back into them if the right trigger comes in. If the appropriate trigger puts you back in there, there's always that channel. There's the root of the thing, which you can get into it and get it activated. But then it's past. Processing means opening it in a way that without triggering it, literally going back and looking at it, not reliving it. There's a big difference. Talking your way through a trauma, which people do in therapy, it allows you to observe both you as that person in the past, and the thing which hurt you as something in the past. When you're triggered, it's all present. It's happening right now. And it's just as fearful or angerful or sorrowful as it was back then.
I believe that the reason why you go into that so quickly is that you do not have any space for anything else. You've crystallized that moment into a specific pathway with certain walls up. And in order to widen that, you have to make room for something else. And you can do that, but you've got to have that as your intention. I will make room for something else. Because if you don't, then those crystallized walls will keep you in that pattern. But you personally must make that decision, because this pattern is yours and only you can alter it.
I love the fact that you mentioned crystals too, because again, when you get into it, it shatters. It's like a stressed fault, and it slips and shatters, and you're into it that quickly. That much of a release of energy, because you get into it that way. You get into it by the trigger way. The way you're talking about is, in essence, giving it. You put space around it so you can look at it, encapsulate it, and solidify it. Almost, you're healing the trigger by putting that space around it. You're able to get in there and take the tension out of it.
Well, it's softening the pattern. Maybe that's the best way to put it. You have to make it more malleable. So you've got to soften your responses. And if you allow yourself that ability to soften the edges, and you can begin at that point to make room for different responses. Because the mindset has got to shift into a broader one.
Well, and we've gone a little bit further into this, but let's take a little break. We'll go back to the studio, and when we come back, we'll talk more about weakness.
Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lynes is book 1 of the adventures of Devkalion, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword Betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief Dev is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. winner of both the Indie Brag Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir. There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere.
You are listening to The Soul of the Everyman on ArtistFirst World Radio. Back to your hosts, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. And this is the second half of our hour. And this evening we've been talking about an interesting subject. Really was triggered by, or rather engendered by, a quote by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. And his quote really encapsulated a result of the subject. The subject of our discussion tonight has been weakness, and really we're talking about the weakness at your core, at your heart. And I think to kind of drop back a little bit and take a different view, every one of us has the potential for weakness at our core. In fact, it's something you have to strive against from the very beginning. And I think there are always points in everyone's life where you are taken to the limit and then beyond your limits, what you think are your limits. And at those moments of very high stress and very high trauma, there is always the potential to connect them to weakness and to provide, to in essence, put a crack into your spirit, your not your eternal spirit rather, but into your psyche, such that if you don't have the ability to process that either event or stressor, it can become let's say a flaw in the psyche, a weakness in the psyche. And one of the things that the psyche will do, that the mind will do, is allow these unprocessed mental traumas to become sort of a canker, they fester like a wound that hasn't healed, and they can be the source of both an internal sense of weakness and vulnerability, which can be powered by fear, and then evidence themselves in behavior which, when looked back upon, we talked about that in the first half hour, you say, why? Who Tolle talks about this. So he's like, who was I when I was screaming and yelling and ranting and raving at this perfectly innocent person who just triggered this emotion? Where did that come from? And it comes from these unprocessed traumas, and in some ways it comes from these parts of yourself that you've left in the past. That's something we've talked about also in Soul of the Everyman. These events if they take you to a place where you don't know how to process them and you encapsulate them, become pieces of yourself, shards of your personality that you've left back there in torment in some ways.
Yeah, energetically, I'm going to switch a little bit. When you have gone through a trauma or go through a trauma, many times you take a piece of your soul and you wrap that whole thing around with your soul so that you have a handle to pick up the event and put it somewhere. And your soul, that part of you, will hold it because it understands that it is for the survival of you as a whole that this needs to be done. But unless you go back to it and unwrap the piece that you put around it and process it, it will always be there knocking on your being because it belongs with you. And it is holding that event in abeyance for you. Mm. Most people think, well, I've handled it. I've put a piece of myself in that, and now I'm just not going to look at it ever again. But you can't do that.
No.
You never can do that. You've got to allow all pieces to return home. And if you think of it in another way, you're almost relegating a piece of yourself to hell. And is that what you really want to do? Especially if you're younger, because the piece of your soul that is torn off and used is the same age as when the event happened.
Mm.
So it may be when you were a child, and that little you is now still trying to handle this in some way. But it needs help. It needs the adult you to help it let go.
And this is the process of healing these weaknesses. So we're all vulnerable to acquiring these weaknesses, to doing that exact process. In fact, it's unconscious. It can happen in an unconscious way. This is a survival mechanism under great stress and trauma that you will encapsulate it. Can't feel that right now. It's very similar if you've ever been injured, and
shock.
for that moment of injury, it can be something as grievous as a gunshot wound. You don't feel it. You know, you get this tremendous wound, and there's no pain. Well, of course, there's tremendous damage, and there's tremendous pain, and those signals come flying up towards the brain, and the brain goes, I'm sorry, we can't feel this right now. We've got to survive, and just shuts that off, and it becomes numb. That's the same thing. This mental trauma is the I is saying, I may be destroyed by this. I can't feel it right now. I can't process it right now. And it's all I. It's all ego. The ego does this and encapsulates it, and it becomes a resistive sort of thing. But you can't, your being cannot be bifurcated, or in this case torn apart in many pieces, because the more of these you have, the worse you are as far as the number of things that you're holding.
Your spirit cannot be shredded
or splintered.
Okay. Right. But the soul can rip off pieces of itself.
Right. And those pieces become weaknesses. They become places where you can be triggered. And
well, you're not whole.
You're not whole.
That's the point where the weakness is. You are not whole as a being.
Right. So maybe we've gone at least as far in this. I don't want to put the whole hour. The other side of this, which Seneca talks about, is that and not in this particular quote, but that the virtues, let's say the justice, the virtue of justice, the virtue of mercy, the virtue of forgiveness, all come in complement to these weaknesses. And in fact, the basic balm, the basic way of healing these things is to look within oneself, process these things, and use these. The forgiveness is a huge one. There have been many people who have had these types of traumas. There are some famous ones who have talked about them, and the only way that they could overcome these, let's say, a childhood trauma, was to actually literally go back, and whether it's either in the physical or in the spirit, forgive that earlier person or event which so harmed that older you. It's the way of unwinding
the
younger you. It's a way of unwinding that younger you that's holding this massive amount of pain and hurt, and forgiving with the older, wiser, current, now being, and pulling back that energy, giving that thing the time now and the space now to be processed, understanding that trauma came from a place which was also probably weakness. It doesn't have to be. It's when it's person to person, yes, but sometimes these traumas are events which took you beyond what could possibly be handled by you then. But your being now is vast. Your being now has the ability to look back and say, yes, those things that happened to the me I was were far beyond what I could have handled. Now I can. Now I have to go back and look.
Yes, and you can only do that when you are in connection with your spirit and the eternal spirit, the larger spirit. So you can go trans-time. And when you have a weakness, when you know you have this weakness, you can actually, through that internal connection with the eternal spirit, send strength and grace down through the ages, down through that timeline, your timeline, and encapsulate that moment, the you in that moment, if you were a child, let's say, with that light, that grace, that love, and that forgiveness. And it takes the edge off. It begins to soften the reactions.
Yeah. And
you can do this. It's whether or not you love yourself enough to do this.
That's a very important point. And much of the therapy that people use to overcome some of these earlier traumas is because the barrier is that they don't love themselves. You have to build up that ability to love oneself, forgive that which hurt you or those which hurt you, and understand that, again, these virtues, this justice, this mercy, this forgiveness, these are positions of strength. You started out the conversation by saying that, the weaker one, the one who gives up in an argument or allows something to be, who forgives. These are not the actions of the weaker. This is the actions of the stronger. Forgiveness is an act of strength. You don't forget what was done, but you forgive what was done. This is an act of strength. Mercy versus cruelty. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, I was going to say, and freedom.
And freedom, yes.
Freedom is at the core of that. To forgive means that you set yourself free.
Yeah.
You are no longer bound into the specific reaction sequence. You are no longer held by anger or rage or hatred. Or fear.
Or fear. And forgiveness is a position of strength. Mercy. When someone has hurt you, and then you come into a position where you then can hurt them back. Mm-hmm. You can have your vengeance. You can be as cruel and as unforgiving as they were to you, and instead you provide them mercy, whether it's forgiveness or just forbearance, to exact your vengeance. Oh, he looks so weak. No, this is an incredibly strong position. I'm reminded of the story of Joseph, in the Bible, where his brothers treated him very cruelly. They were jealous of him. They threw him into a pit and left him to die.
They wanted to kill him.
And many, many, many years later, through the story, I won't go into it, he is in a position of power and strength. He has the ability and the authority to order anyone to be imprisoned or killed. And his brothers come to him, a subset of his brothers, and they don't even recognize him. And at that moment, he could certainly be at war. He could think of it in his heart, saying, well, I can have these people thrown into a pit. I can have them beaten. I can have them killed. They did all this to me. Instead, he shows them great mercy. This is the position of strength, incredible strength, because everything tells you that this is your moment, this is your opportunity, this is when you can get even. But in fact, all you're doing is still not processing the trauma and creating yet another one. Weakness requires strength to heal it, providing mercy, providing justice rather than the injustices which can be worked upon someone, is an incredible strength position. And you will only get these things, forgiveness, mercy, and justice, from the strong. If you see injustice, if you see cruelty, if you see vengeance, you're seeing someone who appears strong but is weak.
Mm-hmm. No, this is true. And it is a decision that you must make, because many times you're functioning on a reaction, on a weakness. Mm. And you have to become aware that you're actually doing that. And that's part of the battle. But I also want to bring just forward that when a person is in this mode, when they are overcompensating and they have been triggered into this memory of what had happened to them, and now they're in a position where they can do the same thing to somebody else, and the cruelty arises. I can do it this way. I can do it better. I can do it meaner. Twist the knife. That person is, you stop for a moment and you look at it and you're going, how is it possible that you're thinking that way? When you have already felt that. But how is it possible that you're thinking that way, that you want to do or say the exact same thing to another person? The thing that hurt you so badly, you want to do it even worse to someone else. How is that possible when you know how bad it can be? And what is coming from you is that reaction to the pain, that fight against the pain. It's all that response, all you know is that you just want to get rid of it, and this is the fastest way you know to get rid of it, by putting that impetus on someone else instead of taking it and saying, no, it stops here. It shall not continue past me. I do not push this forward. The saying that they have nowadays is pay it forward. Well, well, talking about paying things forward, it's like, no, it's that cruelty stops here. And doing that, ending that wave, that standing wave of pain and cruelty, is of service to this world in a greater fashion than you could possibly imagine. It may seem only small to you. Well, it's only me and my whatever situation. But the energy speaks to everything around us. And if you can stop even the smallest thing from continuing in that perpetual wave of cruelty, that frequency, you have done a great heart service, not only to yourself, but to everyone else.
Yeah, in essence, you bring up a very wonderful point with the energies, because you transform what is a lower energy, the energy of cruelty, which stems itself from weakness, which stems itself from fear, from trauma, and you transform it to something higher, transforming cruelty into mercy, or vengeance into forgiveness, are just these amazing transformations of energy. And again, you're right. It's like, it's just me, it's just, but not allowing it to perpetuate. These things, as we all know, these things tend to get handed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, you see in a family that if there was abuse and trauma when you were a child, you hand it off. You're very likely to hand that off to your offspring, and it takes a strength, an inner healing, to not do that. And some wonderful testimonials over many years, people give these where they in essence said it just as you said, it ends with me. I am not going to inflict upon my child or children that which was done to me. A conscious choice. The unconscious, the carrying forward, is exactly that. It will propagate like energy working its way, like heat working its way through metal, like energy working its way through a tuning fork. It will propagate down that whole line
through time,
unless you transform it. And so each one of us, although we individually experience these things, we have the free will and the wherewithal to, with strength and with examination, to transform what is lower negative energies into higher and more positive ones. And that takes energy, and it takes time, but it is a great service. You feel it, as you said, within yourself. You get peace. You get this, forgiveness breaks that bond. You get freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But these are the results of transforming that energy, that negative energy, into something more positive.
And searching for peace, true peace, is what we all actually yearn for. Not to be able to sit within ourselves in this steadfast peace
and wholeness. The wonderful word shalom means wholeness. Nothing missing, nothing broken. Unfortunately, though, we have come to the end of this wonderful hour of the Soul of the Everyman. So I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret. And thank you for listening.